Well, hello there, you Scrublords, and welcome to a quick overview of Devblog chats for 1.77 as of the 20th of February 2018. Now, there's not going to be a bunch of fancy editing in this video. I'm on a bit of a time crunch. I don't exactly have a lot of time to put this together and get it out before I have to take off to my next college class. However, I'm going to be leaving out some of the historical stuff that I normally do and focusing more on the vehicles. I don't think I talked very much about the Jaguar 5 engine in this. I'm kind of doing this post-editing. However, I will probably talk about that in a later video if I have the time. So, enjoy. So the first vehicle we're going to be covering quickly, as I'm sure many of you are aware of at this point, is the Challenger 1. Challenger 1 was unveiled last week and took a lot of us by surprise, I imagine, especially me. I know that last Devblog chats I talked about the Leopard 2K and how it was sort of the father to the Leopard 2. And what I had anticipated, if they were going to introduce any sort of counterparts for these vehicles, I anticipated them introducing something like the Chieftain 900, or the FV211 aluminum Chieftain, which was basically a Chieftain built out of aluminum with a bunch of chop-em armor packages placed all over it. And interestingly enough, Gaijin sort of leapfrogged a lot of those vehicles and has straight up put the Challenger 1 into the game. They would have introduced, like Leopard 2 AV at the very least, or straight up Leopard 2 A0 or A4 or any of the A variants leading up to that. But no, it appears that Gaijin has just decided to throw the Challenger 1 in there to, I guess, get the ball rolling a little bit, maybe sort of change things up as far as the Chieftain lineup was concerned. I'm not totally sure what the thinking behind that exactly was, but I'm not against it, to say the least. The Challenger 1 is a potentially very, very powerful tank. Now, I know a lot of people are concerned about the huge power creep this is going to cause, and frankly, I'm not too concerned. And that's not because I don't think that there will be a level of power creep, but I don't think that the Challenger is going to be this unstoppable monster that a lot of people are making it out to be. And that's simply because the Challenger, for all its strengths, is not infallible. Now, there's this reputation the Challenger has of never ever being knocked out in action, and was never destroyed in and I heard somebody claim that it was never destroyed in incidents with friendly fire. I don't know if that's true. I don't think that's true, but regardless, even if it is, I think that a lot of that comes down to the arenas that it was fighting in, especially Desert Storm. Now, Desert Storm, in 1991, the 1991 Gulf War, what pitted vastly superior and technologically superior Western coalition against a technologically inferior opponent. People love to quote that the T-72 was a terrible tank and it got blown up all the time by M1 Abrams and Challengers. The fact of the matter is that there were very few T-72s at all, and most of those were basically cheapo export models that the Iraqis had purchased from the Soviets and so on. At least I believe they got them from the Soviets. They may have gotten them from the U.S. I don't know. I'm going off the top of my head here, and I didn't really have a lot of time to do historical research before this. But anyways, people are always bagging on the Iraqi army. And the fact of the matter is that if the Challenger had gone up against proper Russian tank units, they would have faced far stiffer opposition, first of all. The tanks would have been far more capable. They would have been far better armored, for that matter. And they would have been crewed by much, much better trained troops, I think. And the Challengers would have had a lot more difficult of a time. In addition, they would have been facing modern Russian equipment. And by that time, I believe the T-90 was still in development. The T-80, I think, was the premier Russian main battle tank, although it was hideously expensive, and that's a discussion for another day. But basically, what the Challenger is going to be is a Chieftain with far better turret protection. The turret armor on the Challenger is incredible. But the lower plate of the Challenger, I imagine, is probably not going to be that thick. It's still going to be a problem, I think. And in addition, the Challenger has this front-mounted driver's viewport that is perfectly flat. Now, granted, it's a very small target, but that could potentially create an armor weak point. And if there's something that we've learned about War Thunder is that people know weak points. Or people learn weak points pretty darn quickly. So, if there's a good weak point, or if there's a decently sized weak point, they will take advantage of it. Now, what I think the Challenger is going to be great at doing is doing what the Chieftain was doing, but just a little bit more maneuverable and faster. I think it has like a 1200 horsepower engine, And according to the devblog, at least, they're saying that it can reach speeds of approximately 35 kilometers per hour, which is not bad. However, most of the MBTs of the period are going at least that, or faster. So the Challenger is definitely going to be the slower of a majority of the main battle tanks at its equivalent tier. The gun on it, I believe, because it's one of the first versions of the Challenger, it has the Chieftain's gun still, the L11. I believe, I'm trying to remember if they replaced the gun on Challenger 2, or if they ever replaced the gun on the Challenger 1. It's not coming to me right now, but it still has the Chieftain's gun. It will most likely have improved ammunition, possibly Jericho shot. Who knows? We'll see. Regardless, it is also still 2-piece ammunition. It is a bagged charge, and the projectile, whether that be HESH or AP-FSDS. The British never really, even today, still don't really use HEAT-FS. They don't use shaped charge ammunition for their tank guns, which is kind of strange considering the fact that everybody else has acknowledged at this point that HESH is both obsolete and nowhere near as effective as a heat round is. But that's neither here nor there. Regardless, that's Challenger. Let's move on to the other vehicles. So the next vehicle we're going to talk about is the Magach 3, which was announced as a Tier 5 Premium coming up for the US tech tree. Now, the Magach, if you aren't already aware, is an Israeli modification of the M48 main battle tank, or medium tank, technically. They replaced the 90mm cannon on the M48, and they replaced it with an L7 105mm gun. They also, this being the M48A5 model, they also replaced the disgustingly large machine gun cupola and put in a standard commander's cupola with all-round periscopes. In addition, they also replaced the Continental petrol engine with a 750 horsepower diesel, which brought it in line with their other logistical systems, and as a result, they created quite the powerful tank. I also believe they improved the fire control systems as well, although I don't remember to what degree they did, but regardless, they turned it into a very, very capable tank. And the Israelis, to my knowledge, still use the Magach to a certain degree. I mean, they may have retired the last of them, but they have heavily upgraded the they still use the M60 versions of the Magach. I believe the M48s have already been retired at this point in time, but I could be wrong. If any of you Israelis out there, I know you guys have national service. If you guys know otherwise, feel free to correct me down in the comment section below. Again, I'm going off of my own personal knowledge here. Don't really have a lot of time as I'm on a time crunch. Anyways, potentially this vehicle could be very good. I see it as probably about a 7.7 battle rating vehicle, seeing as Gaijin doesn't really like introducing top-tier premiums. Although there was a period of time where the Object 120 was able to get into top-tier games. They have since corrected that. And however, this and the next vehicle I'm going to talk about, I'm going to warn people a little bit and say, hold off on pre-ordering these vehicles. Gaijin has said that they plan on revising APCR and APDS ballistics. I know that the 120mm APDS rounds on the British 120mm guns are getting buffed next patch. We don't know if that buff is going to extend to the 105s. Somehow I don't think it will. If that's the case, there are probably better options for good Tier 5 premiums out there. And I'm saying this because a lot of people I know are rushing out to go and pre-order these things. This is a $50 tank. It is not cheap by any means. And I would say the pre-order bonus that you get with it is really not worth it unless you are unless you're really into like Israeli armored vehicles, and this is something you've been hoping for forever. If for the average user, I would say hold your money, wait until other YouTubers get their hands on it and do some reviews of it, wait for the reviews for this vehicle to come out, and then consider purchasing it. I would say hold off on pre-ordering these vehicles because we don't know how well they will perform. This thing could be an utter heap of garbage, and if you spent all that money on it, you could really be hurting. I mean, we just simply don't know how well these vehicles will fare. We don't know if it has a stabilizer. Well, at least I don't know if it has a stabilizer. I bet it might, but I don't know for sure. I mean, that's a pretty cramped turret. But I would say if you're thinking of purchasing this, hold off for now, wait, and see how well it performs in-game first before you run out and buy this vehicle. Regardless, that's basically the Magach. It's got a very, very storied history to it. It took part in many, many different wars for Israel. It took part in the Six-Day War, I believe, the Yom Kippur War, and it performed very, very well in both of those conflicts and gave a good name of itself. All right, moving on to the next vehicle. So the next one we're going to talk about has not actually been officially announced yet. However, it is already on the Gaijin.net store and is available for pre-order now. That being said, hold your money. Again, this is another Tier 5 premium vehicle. This is the AMX-30. This is the basically the pre-production prototype, I guess. And this is going to be a lower battle rating than the AMX-30 1972. I don't know if that lower battle rating change is going to be coming for the 1972 version that we already have, which is a coaxial 20mm cannon. This version only has a coaxial 50 caliber. They downgraded the secondary armament, and apparently they're going to downgrade the battle rating for this vehicle. And part of the reason I'm saying hold your money for this vehicle is because the heat rounds on it do jack diddly as far as penetration, or as far as damage is concerned. Not so much penetration. The penetration on this gun is pretty darn good. 360 millimeters is not bad. It only fires heat, high explosive, and smoke. And as a result, despite having a decently high rate of fire and being decently mobile, it's nowhere near as mobile as a Leopard. Being okay, it's kind of like a subpar Leopard, and again, it doesn't have a stabilizer. None of the French vehicles have stabilizers. Not a single one of them, as far as I know. Other than maybe the early vehicles which have the shoulder stabilizers that are stabilized by the crew. But even then, it's not really a true mechanical stabilizer. So yeah, I would say hold your money for the AMX-30. It's not a very good tank in its current state, and I don't think that even with the battle rating downgrade, it's going to be all that competitive. So we'll have to wait and see. If Gaijin decides to buff the heat damage on these vehicles, then maybe they'll become more effective. But until that day comes, we'll just have to wait and see. So hold your money for this vehicle. It's $50. It's really expensive. So wait until the reviews come out before you purchase anything. All right, that being over with, let's move on to the next one. So there's one more vehicle that I want to discuss that has not been announced yet, and that we know is going into the game for sure. And that is this vehicle, the T64BV, or Bravo Victor, I guess if you want to go by the NATO alphanumeric pronunciation. Anyways, what is the T64BV? Well, it is basically just a further upgrade on the T64B, which is potentially going to be added to the game as well. We don't know for that for sure, but if it comes in, it would make sense as sort of an intermediary between this and the T64A. The main two differences, the first one being very, very obvious there, that it has ERA added all over the front of the vehicle and the sides, and this effectively gives it the protection of about 800 millimeters, around that range, against shaped charge munitions, that is ATGMs and heat rounds, which is actually quite useful, I imagine. Considering that the Leopard 2K's Heat FS round is capable of penetrating, I said in the video it was like 700 millimeters. So yeah, this vehicle in particular going to be one of those immune to that. It is also probably going to be the only vehicle that's actually immune, at least for the first hit, from a hot ATGM, which is actually quite surprising considering that up until now, the hot ATGM can basically just point and click on almost any vehicle in the game. So that's pretty huge. The other major thing that actually upgrade that came with the T64 Bravo, the vehicle right before this one, is the addition of a gun-launched ATGM. And specifically, I'm talking about the NM1112 ATGM, which was used on this vehicle, and I believe it was also used in its later variants on the T80 as well. So, the NM1112 was a gun-launched 125mm ATGM, and it could penetrate approximately about 600 millimeters of armor. And this effectively gives the vehicle both the abilities of, both an improved ability from the stance of the IT-1, and the fact that you've got all this armor, but also gives you the ability to quickly switch over to other APF SDS and potentially other shaped charge or high explosive rounds. So, this vehicle, I imagine, will probably be a little bit slower than the regular T64, seeing as it's weighed down by all this ERA. However, overall, it's probably going to play pretty much the same. It's just going to have more protection against shaped charges. Not much else to say there. Without further ado, that is all for this episode of Devblog Chats. I realize I didn't go into much of the history of any of these vehicles, and that is because I am on a bit of a time crunch. I am trying to get this video out and edited before I run off to my next class. So, thank you guys for listening. This has been Many Miles Away. Keep your tracks checked, keep your bindings in place, keep around in the tube, and I will see you guys in the next video.